Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you're still hanging in with me. We're now going to go through the new content in Phase 5, and this will go even quicker than the last video because the formatting, the changes to the manual, all the things that we covered in Phase 3 are repeated with Phase 5. So I won't go into too much detail on those because you've already seen that with the previous package. So starting right into the material, if you turn to page 5 of your manual, just like I did with Phase 3, we've listed out the mandatory modules. For the Phase 5 content, there's actually 6 mandatory modules, but not to worry, they are not super long. So even though it sounds like there's more mandatory modules, it's actually a shorter package time-wise than Phase 3. Usually this package is sitting around the 2-hour mark, so hopefully you find easier to deliver. There's still 4 optional modules that will look very similar, although with the post-deployment spin on it. So I'll very quickly go through your 6 mandatory modules. Again, the introduction module with the same focus of welcoming, comfort, acknowledging experience, and introducing the transition and reintegration process. Module 2 is a transition from operations, and it is quite a changed module. I think you'll enjoy the changes because instead of now focusing on how the member transitions from operations, this module is now designed to identify and normalize the transition process for both the military member and the family member, including physiology of stress and decompression after high stress. The content's really been modified, so we'll make sure we cover that quite closely. Module 3, challenges of reintegration, again, to identify and normalize those normal challenges that a family or a couple would face in the reintegration process. Then we also have tools for managing the reintegration. So at Module 4, we're going to get into some of the skills. And here we don't focus as much on the big 4. We look at more assertive communication strategies and other useful tools for reintegration. Module 5, problems post-deployment. We do want to talk a little bit about what might be some indicators that a loved one or a family member is not doing well, followed up by Module 6, which is preparing for a successful reintegration, which allows the family to design an individual reintegration plan and celebrate the success while preparing for the return of their loved one. The 4 optional modules, Module A is again the overview of the R2MR program, and it is exactly the same as what you saw in Phase 3. Option B is the military transition and reintegration program. So where we know the member has had the Phase 4 training, we can talk a little bit about what that training looks like. Optional Module B is supporting dependent children. And then finally, optional Module D is supporting your adult child as they return from deployment. So all of the 4 options have a similar look and feel to the Phase 3 package, but obviously focused on post-deployment. You'll see on page 7 of your manual, again, where you would insert the optional modules, but just like when we went through the Phase 3 package, I will cue you when we're going through the mandatory modules where they would be inserted, but not actually review it until after we finish the mandatory package. Finally, the customization with regards to your logo and some pictures, all that remain the same as what I covered when we talked about Phase 3. So let's jump right in then. The slide on your screen right now is the introductory slide, and it's the same as Phase 3. You're going to welcome them, introduce yourself, take care of those housekeeping issues, just like we did with Phase 3. With the next slide, we're looking at what the objectives are of the post-deployment package or transition and reintegration package. So again, you're going to review the objectives of the package. You're again going to interact with your audience, get to know who's in the audience and what they are hoping to learn from the briefing. Just the same activity that we did in the previous version of Phase 5. We really want and we really think it's important to have the audience reflect back on their challenges and accomplishments during the deployment. So we start with what were some of the challenges that they faced, and then we move into what were some of their accomplishments and some positive things that they're taking away, so that they have a chance to process some of those experiences that they've been through over the last 6 to 9 months. We finish that up with that positive message that you've seen as well in the previous version of Phase 5, which is thank you and an acknowledgement for their sacrifices and contributions to the success of the operation. And I think that's such an important message to convey at the beginning and at the end of the package, and you'll see that when we get there. Just like with the Phase 3 package, we're going to now talk about transition and reintegration. So we've zoomed up the highway just onto the merge, and just like in the previous version of Phase 5, it's the same content. So we're looking at using the analogy of merging into onto the highway from the on-ramp as a similar process for what the types of communications and strategies we would need to use for reintegration of your loved one. So that would be the end of the first introductory module. It would be here that you would insert option A if you wanted to review the entire R2MR program before moving to transitioning from operations, which is the beginning of module 2. So the introduction here is basically to describe what it is that you're going to be covering during this and normalizing that there's reactions as you transition out of periods of high stress. Changes occur physiologically when people have been exposed to high stress for an extended period of time, and then if we can explain some of the emotions and behaviors that you may notice or that they may notice in themselves and in their loved one, they can better understand what's going on. This is the introduction to this module. The next slide looks similar to what it looked like in the previous package, but what you'll notice now is it's got both the family and the member listed on here. So many families and CF members experience conflicting emotions after deployment, and it talks about that paradox for both, that you can on one hand be excited and looking forward to it, but on the other hand feel angry or anxious, feeling on edge, and having that quick discussion on why that might occur with the audience prior to going through some of the explanatory slides that follow. For those of you that hated our stress response slide, and I did hear you told me that it was too complicated, it was too much, and I absolutely agree. So we simplified the explanation of the stress response. It's still important that we touch on it. So we talk, essentially, all we want to do now is basically say, deployments are stressful for both CF members and their families. That when the body is confronted by stress, any source of stress, it enacts the stress response, which is essentially the releasing of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol into the body, which causes some key physiological changes. The next piece that we want to describe for families is the difference between an acute stressors and chronic stress. So acute stress refers to those highly stressful events or moments that happen during the deployment, either at home or on mission, when those stress hormones push that gas pedal of the body, if you use the analogy of a car, and it rev it up and puts it into high alert to manage the event. So then you can talk, what might be some examples of when that occurred during the deployment for you or for your loved one. You want to differentiate that from chronic stress, which is really about managing those ongoing demands that continued for a long period of time. So the analogy we can use here with a car is it's like basically letting your car idle, continuously decreasing fuel, causing wear and tear on the body over time. So those two sources of stress have confronted both the families and their military loved ones while the deployment has occurred. Because of that, there's some key changes that you'll notice during the transition. And that brings us to the first one, which is we know stress is linked to emotions. That because of that, it's normal when we've been under those types of stressors to have feelings of irritability and anxiety, to maybe overreact or have exaggerated emotional reactions to normal day-to-day activities. And that for both you, the family members and their loved ones, this will decrease over the first few weeks after the two of you start to reconnect and reintegrate. So normalizing that it's okay to have those feelings and understand that exaggerated response. The next thing we know is that stress increases arousal, that when you had to deal with that chronic ongoing stress and potentially some of those acute stressors along the way, it takes time for the body to kind of release that activation and that tension, so it takes time for the body to slow down. So some of that exaggerated response is a little bit about having pent-up adrenaline in the system that is now kind of going to have to be take a little bit of time to come down. The next thing that we know is that stress heightens threat sensitivity. So it takes time to readjust and turn off high alert mode. So what I really like about the change in this slide is that we're not just talking about the high alert mode for military members. So for military members, of course, if they may find themselves scanning their environment for threat. But for family members, you have also been in a high alert state, living on your own, having to pay attention to everything, you know, that bump in the night or that crying child was all on that individual for that period of time. So everything's sort of on high alert, and it's going to take a little bit of time for that to reset itself. And during that time, both the military member and the loved one and the family member may notice that they're primed, they're reacting very quickly to things in their environment because that's what they've had to do over the past 6 to 9 months. Stress also reduces our ability to process things. So again, with not needing to explain, you know, all the aspects of the brain, we do need to know that when we're under, oh, sorry, I went too far on my slide. I'm just going to go back there. When we're under stress, it takes some time, or we don't always have the time, that's the better way of putting it, to process what we're going through, like to kind of think about it and bounce it around in our more cognitive or cortex part of the brain. So it's very common after the stress has ended, we spend more time, we think about it, we may dream about it. If it was a negative event, we may be distracted by more disturbing or intrusive memories or nightmares. And that's just your brain figuring out all the aspects of what you went through for the past 6 to 9 months. It can be troubling for some because if those experiences were challenging, every time we think about it, we have a bit of an emotional reaction to that. But that understanding that we don't need to be alarmed by that. So having some dreams about it or thinking about it in the first few weeks or even first month after getting home is sort of a part of the package. It doesn't need to be something that we overreact to, and that it should settle out on its own and dissipate over time. Now later in the package we will talk about what happens if that doesn't occur, but for most people that's what the process looks like. And finally, and most importantly, both the military member and the family one is freaking tired. It's been a long 6 to 9 months, and stress takes a lot out of us. So understanding that stress causes fatigue and that the quality and quantity of both the sleep for military members and their loved ones hasn't been the same as when the family is connected. So understanding that there's been limited opportunities for either one of you or anybody in the family to rejuvenate and relax and re-energize, and that the consequences of sheer exhaustion are feelings of irritability and anxiety. So it kind of all makes sense that that paradox is really about the physiology of stress. And that brings us to the end of the second module. So I hope the change in making it a dual focus and making it a little less clinical will better appeal to your families. And I'm really looking forward to some feedback from all of you on how that goes. So that was the end of module 2, and it would be here you would insert option B. So it will be here where you would insert the package about the phase 4 content that the military member would have gotten that we will review at the end of the package. So then we go to module 3, which is the challenges of reintegration. So with the challenges of reintegration, you just want to, on this slide, we're just introducing it. We want to take some time and just show the military family members that there's just these common normal challenges to reintegrating the family after deployment. We reintroduced the mental health continuum model, and it will say in your notes, just like it did in the previous version of phase 5, that you should ask the audience how many people attended the pre-deployment package, how many people are familiar with the mental health continuum, knowing that for some people this could be the first time they see it, so you're going to have to explain what are we talking about when we talk about the continuum. After you reintroduce the continuum, the importance there is that you're normalizing the yellow phase, the reacting phase of the continuum for both military members and for their families. And that's why, if you notice on the slide, it's that section that is bolded and a little larger font than the other parts of the continuum. Next, we're going to move back to our bump slide that you've seen in phase 3, but we're really going to focus on the second bump this time and the normalizing that there is a reaction period, and it really is just sort of a summary of what we've already talked about, that people will return to green, but that there's a bit of an adjustment for most families when a deployment ends and their loved one's coming home. So then we ask them, well, what do you think that adjustment looks like? What do you think some of those challenges are for you as family members and for your loved one? And you really get an opportunity to give them a chance to come out with what they believe those challenges to be. And then what we can do is follow it up with all of the other additional points. And one of the things that I really want you to take note of with this slide is that just like in phase 3, after you've done a brainstorming with your audience, you only need to cover the points they missed. So if all these points were covered, you can flash them up and say, you covered all these things, just on those, so you're paying attention to all of the possible challenges. That way we don't spend too much time and be too repetitive with the package. After we've covered the challenges, we then move to the tools for managing reintegration. So you're seeing what I was describing earlier, that many of these modules are quite short because there is more of them. So for managing tools for managing the reintegration, we first want to just introduce the concept that, of course, this takes time and effort, and get the audience the time to discuss what it's been like for them in the past or what they're anticipating it's going to be like for them, what tools they're going to use. And we're going to move to reuniting and the key of communication. And much of the tools that we talk about is really geared around communication, because we know communication is the key to successful reintegration experience. So starting with asking them, just like in the previous package, in the previous version of phase 5, how many of them have already discussed those reintegration plans, like who's going to meet them at the airport, what kind of a celebration, if any, they're expecting when they return, and basically wanting to start that reintegration up successfully right from the very beginning. And all of that is familiar to you from the previous version of phase 5. Then we do spend some time talking about, just like before, what are some tips for communicating, talking about I statements, talking about how and when and what to consider with verbal and nonverbal communication, and all of that is the same as what was in the previous Phase 5 package. We also acknowledge, just like in the previous package, that it's important that you acknowledge, discuss, and appreciate everybody's contribution to the success of the operation. And so talking about what you could ask and what you can share that was their loved one's experience, and then also looking at sharing what your experience was and what were some of those important milestones and events that occurred for the family while their loved one was away. So we talk a little bit about that, and again, that's similar to what we did in the previous version of Phase 5. After that, we move into more concrete tips for a successful reintegration, and none of that is different from what we had talked about before. Obviously, just the look and the feel and the language on a few of those points. Coping strategies is the next slide, and that activity remains the same. What's an example of a negative coping strategy, and what's an example of a positive coping strategy, and basically giving the message that most people succeed most of the time with the stressors that they're faced with, but that sometimes we do need new tools and we need to add tools to our repertoire. So the next slide is, well, where can I find those other tools? And it isn't in the scope of the R2MR training to be able to cover all of the great information that it is out there. So on this slide, I have listed the national programs, so Intercom, Stress Take Charge, Managing Angry Moments, the Mental Fitness and Suicide Awareness Program, but I would encourage you to modify this slide and add some of the unique workshops that you provide at your local MFRC. So family members get an idea that if they need some specialized tools in a particular area, what is available to them to access. So you can go ahead and customize this slide for your community and your family's needs. That would take us to the end of that module, and it would be here where you would insert options C and D. So parents of dependent children and parents of the returning member, and we'll talk about those at the end, prior to moving into Module 5, which is problems post-deployment. And this was another big change with our package. We really wanted to focus on normalizing the normal reactions transition as we've done so far, but also not give enough information that people can keep an eye out for what might be problematic, but not scaring families either that it's all doom and gloom. And I did hear the feedback with the previous Phase 5, we spent a lot of time talking about problems post-deployment, and it came a little bit doom and gloom, which is really not what we were aiming for. So with the introductory slide for Phase 5, you're going to introduce the module, and you're going to start right up front saying that most members and families manage the transition well, and there's no further problems, but that we do want you to know what to watch for and how to respond just in case some problems were to occur in the transition and reintegration process. So this is the same slide, that normalizing it's okay not to be distressed, it's okay to be distressed following any significant stressor. And you'll notice the change here is we add a bit of color, so we kind of brought in the colors of the continuum. But then at the bottom of your notes for this slide, we start talking about that important minority, 8 to 12% of CF members or families who don't find resolution, who do continue to struggle, and that we need to pay attention to what to watch for. We also then, again, want to highlight that not only are most people okay after a tour, people grow and personal growth and development as a direct result from both the members and the family's experiences during the deployment is very, very common, and that resilience and these types of situations contribute to that resilience. So we kind of, again, highlighting the personal growth before starting talking about, okay, so if all of that being said, what might we notice if the transition wasn't going well, and what might be some signs of difficulties? Just like in phase 5, we start first with what signs of reintegration difficulties might look like at a family level, what might be some of the things that are noticed, and then we use the continuum to describe the warning signs at an individual level. Again, as applied to both the member and the individual family members. So this slide is animated. It's not animated in the video, as you can see, but what you will start out seeing is the list of reacting symptoms, because we said, hey, those are normal, and then when you click on your slide, the last for more than several weeks gets worse or gets better and then gets worse. Those would be indicators that maybe some extra support is required. We also do want to do those red flags that indicate the immediate assistance is required, because what we don't want to give family members is, well, it's normal to have some bumps during the first 6 weeks, yet some of these particular activities are going on and there's no timelines. I mean, obviously, if we see any of these in any one of our loved ones or our family members, we would want to seek help immediately. So that is the same as what you saw in the phase 5 package. Then we want to express concern. So if we notice any one of those problems as a family member, we then want to talk about how will we approach our loved one and encourage them to seek professional mental health care, and how to set some boundaries and take care of ourselves in the process. And that material is very similar to what we saw in the previous package. So then we have a video, and I do want to play this video, but unfortunately, because of timing, I'm not going to play this for you today. It is the video many of you may have seen with Rick Mercer, where it has recovered Canadian Armed Forces members talking about what the challenges to seeking care were for them and how they overcame them. When you downloaded the package, this video was part of the Phase 5 package, and prior to running a Phase 5, I encourage you to watch the video, because what we're doing is using this as a way to show that, yes, in fact, there are some barriers or some challenges to seeking care, but that for many, many members, they get care anyway, and they are stronger and happier as a result of that. And this is a fantastically positive video about the benefits of accessing care. So you would play this video here, and again, I apologize that with this particular recording, I can't show it to you, but I'm confident that you'll be able to watch that on your own, and if there's any comments or questions, you can forward it to me. This would then follow up with, okay, so we did see that there are people that seek care. What can I expect if I seek help? And this is similar to what you saw in Phase 3, right? It's just normalizing the treatment process. And then we have, well, what resources are available for military members? And this is an animated slide where you can talk about each of those boxes. And what I love about this slide is it shows that there's access to resources for military members all along the mental health continuum. Right at the very top, we have our friends, family, unit, and leadership, because they expand from green all the way to the reddest of red. But then we have primary prevention, supportive intervention, and clinical intervention. Depending on when people come forward, there's the appropriate resource. what I do like as well is we've done the same thing this time for family members. So you have your family and friends. The MFRC is a resource that's going to support families from green all the way to red, and so will the family information line. But then there's preventative resources, supportive resources, and clinical intervention where necessary. So it allows you to cover some of those key resources, but show them how various resources are available to them depending on where they might be or where they believe they might be along the mental health continuum. So that's a new way of presenting resources for families, and that brings us to the end of that module. So then you would move, sorry, there's an extra slide in there. I apologize. Actually, this is just reinforces what the family resources were. I apologize for that. Actually delete that slide. So I'm just going to flip back. You will have this slide in your package, not the next slide. So then what we would do is move right into preparing for a successful reintegration. So what this last module is putting it all together and trying to end our package on a positive, helpful note that allows family members to look at all the information that we've talked about, customize what their individual action plan is going to be, and then end it in a very positive way. So the next slide is another worksheet activity. It existed in the Phase 5 package as well, but it existed, I think, earlier in the package. So now we've moved this package, this piece of the material all the way to the end. And I'm just going to turn the camera on here so you can see me for this last little bit. So you'll get that last slide after you go through the actions. And then finally, that will bring you to the end of the package where you, at this point, close the Phase 5 material with a very positive acknowledgement, again, to their contributions to the mission, their sacrifices that they've made, and how exciting that they can now enjoy the return of their loved one. They're coming home and they've made it, and that's fantastic. So we would then thank them again and take any comments or questions. And again, like with Phase 3, we don't have an evaluation completed yet for the package, so feel free to use whatever mechanism you gather feedback from your families from, and please forward any of those results to me. So that's the end of the core of the Phase 5 material. And now, just like with Phase 3, I'm going to very quickly walk you through the optional modules. So the overview of the R2MR program, I'm not going to go through that again because it's exactly the same as what you saw in Phase 3. The option B is transition and reintegration, and some of these slides will look familiar to you. They were in the previous version of Phase 5, but we've broadened it and took out the Army language. So it's not just about TLD, it's about what are we trying to do when we provide this information to military members prior to them returning home to their loved ones. And there's the goals, and we can review those. And then, just like in the previous version, there's some quotations that allow family members to see that the material seems to be well appreciated by their military loved ones. The third module, Module C in the optional modules, is the supporting children. Obviously, it has the same focus on supporting dependent children through the reintegration process, and we start again with an introduction, then we talk about normalizing the adjustment, just like we did with the Phase 3 package, and asking parents what do they do to cope, what kind of strategies have been useful for them in the past, following up with some concrete strategies that will help support children during this phase, just like in the Phase 3 package, only tweaked to the strategies that are required now for reintegration. and then followed again by what are some of those core needs that children need during this time period. Just like with Phase 3, when we have the Phase 3 and Phase 5 workshop done for parents of dependent children, we'll insert a slide, or you can insert a slide that advertises that workshop that you would run at another time. And then finally, supporting your child's transition home. And really, this is really where we get parents of CF members, just like we did in Phase 5. We introduced that they have a unique situation and a unique role. We asked them who's been through this before and what were some of the challenges and strategies that they used to overcome it. Then we talk about what are the specific challenges that we know exist for parents, but we start this by normalizing that after any major life experience, so whether it's a deployment, a marriage, the birth of a child, there are changes in ourselves because we grow. So recognizing that changes are to be expected in their children as they return home, and then we talk about what those changes are. So changes in perspective and maturity, and behavior and values, and then again, the challenge then is usually the redefining of relationships, and that's the same content that you saw in the previous version. And we talked about strategies, how to manage that, and what other resources are available to help families. And these are strategies that we've tweaked a little bit, communication being key, asking about their assignment, recognizing that there may be, they may not get the opportunity, that their loved one may not want to share everything that occurred, talking about renegotiating rules and routines, especially for parents who the CF member is coming back home to live, talking about flexibility around expectations for homecoming, so knowing that their son or daughter may not want to spend every day with them as soon as they get home, and kind of knowing how to respect those limits, but also get their needs met. Watching for any red flags, and also just really letting your loved one know that you've missed them. In your manual, if you look on page 133, I did tell you that with Phase 5, some of the mandatory content is really geared at spouses, and we recognize that. So if you had a group of only parents of deployed members or returning members in your audience, there's some changes you would want to take, some deletions or hiding of some slides, maybe some wording changes, and all of those are suggested for you. So we recognize that for those unique times when you have just parents that you're teaching to, much of the content remains the same but may need to be tweaked a little bit, and it gives you some direction on what those changes would look like, because they don't need a whole different package, they just need the flavor of their package to be tailored to their unique needs. So you have made it. You've made it to the end. I'm sure you've got something out of this. I hope you've got something out of this. It's been my pleasure to do this for you, and I really just want to say how thankful I am to each and every one of you who I know are out there talking about the usefulness of the Road to Mental Readiness and its application to families. And I constantly get stopped by staff from the various MFRCs and, talking about the strengths and giving me some feedback on how we can make it even better and how we can expand it. And I'm so appreciative of all of that feedback. And I hope that you're going to find the packages that we went through today, Phase 3 and Phase 5, better meet the needs of your families and your communities. And I also encourage you to continue to pass some feedback to us. And also, I'm so excited about what we talked about in the intro, is the expansion of this program specifically for our families, and working with you to be able to give you these suite of packages that you can use as you need in your various communities. And as I said at the beginning, and I'll say at the end, if you have some ideas on what that needs to look like and you aren't an active member on our R2MR Family Working Group Advisory Committee, please feel free to contact me directly with what your suggestions would be. And you can find me on the DIN. Remember to find me on the DIN. It's Kimberly, KIMBERLY.guest, G-U-E-S-T, @forces.gc.ca. And any one of you are welcome to contact me at any time. So I appreciate your time. I hope you found this useful and a more efficient way to get updated on changes that we've made to the package. So thanks very much. And I'll keep you posted as the new material comes your way for R2MR.